Hello and welcome back to Chewing It Over. As you'll see, Jack Chew is not here again today. In fact, he is not here all week. Someone let him have holiday. Don't know who that was. We shall be finding them and appropriately telling them never to let him do that again. So it's me again, Jack March, and you might be tuning in going, Jack again, other Jack is going to talk about rheumatology. And I'm not going to talk about rheumatology today. I'm talk about something different. I actually, believe it or not, do spend some time doing other things other than rheumatology. Alistair Beverley says, "Hey up, Peggy Patch," which hopefully he's going to explain what that is. He has got me loud and clear, which is very good. So very happy about that. Also, I've got a brand new light, which I can see reflected in my eyes, which I wanted to test out today. So hopefully that's making me look, I don't know, better. Who knows? Anyway. But so we're not going to talk about rheumatology today. I do want to hopefully get some interaction with this session today. Help me out. I don't really know. I don't have any answers for this. Certainly don't claim to have all the answers for this. But I want to talk about a little bit about what happens when your ideas don't work. So there's various reasons behind that, both why I want to talk about it, but also why the reasons themselves might not work. And this comes about off a few things that have happened over the last 6 to 9 months, personally, with things that I've tried to do, but other things that I've seen as well. And I think there's some overlay into clinical practice as well as purely online or entrepreneurial ideas, if you might think about that. And I'd be interested to know what everybody else thinks. What do you do if you have an idea and you try to implement it and it doesn't quite work out as much as you, or as well as you thought it might have? You thought it was a really good idea, otherwise you wouldn't have gone on to try and pursue it, I suppose, unless you thought, oh, this is a really average idea, I'm going to put some time and effort into it. I doubt that that's a particularly common thing to do. So interested to get some comments on, have you had ideas that haven't really worked? What did you do? How did you proceed afterwards? Because some of the things that I've done over the last 6 to 9 months, they've taken quite a lot of my time and effort and resources, and sometimes they don't come off as I might have thought they would. Something as simple as a tweet, maybe you thought was quite an interesting thing, and you did a tweet and then no one bothered to talk about it or interact with you or like it or anything. And there's various reasons for that. I think there's various reasons why ideas don't work. Some of them might be timing. You might have timed the idea wrong, perfectly good idea, and it's put out at the wrong time. Might be a perfectly good idea, but housed in the wrong way. Certainly something that I've noticed. I remember one of the first ideas that I had, which I tried to sell, was an audiobook. And I thought, people love podcasts. People like audiobooks. Why wouldn't people like an audiobook of rheumatology? Turns out nobody likes a rheumatology audiobook for various reasons. Hardly anybody bought it. So it was an idea. It didn't really work. I think as a final product, it's what I aimed for. It just wasn't popular. And that's certainly one way of an idea not working. Other ways, of course, would be that it literally doesn't work. So in clinical practice, you implement a treatment or an educational plan or something similar, and maybe it makes someone worse, it doesn't make them better. Maybe they don't like it, maybe they don't engage. What do you do with that idea afterwards? This is what I'm interested in. Do you bin the idea off? Do you reinvent the idea, use it for something else, repurpose it, come back to it later, plow on? If you think it's a really good idea, do you keep going? What do you do with that idea? That's what I'm really interested in. And I suppose, I've tried to repurpose some of my ideas that haven't worked. I've either given them away as means of rewards for things or ways of getting people engaged in some of my content without paying for it. It's hard, isn't it? Because especially when you've created something for a specific reason and it's not really fulfilling that reason, is it as easy to repurpose it? Take it back to clinical practice. You provide someone an exercise for a reason, let's say, let's make it simple, and it doesn't work, in inverted commas, can you repurpose that exercise to achieve something else? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Depends how specific you've been, I suppose. So something I've been tackling over the weekend and over the last few days is, what do I do with some of these ideas? I have ideas that I don't even work on occasion. They just sort of sit in an ideas pile that I might get to at some point. Either the timing might be better, or I might have some time and resources to put towards them. So what do I do? Do I bin off those ideas that haven't worked quite as well as I thought I would and crack on with a new one? What do I try and learn from those ideas? Do I try and take something of what I did that worked and apply it into the new ideas? I don't know, really. This is what I've been tackling. This is what I've been, some uncertainty maybe. We're told to be certain in uncertainty, and this is where I'm stuck at the moment. How do I repurpose some of these things? And, you know, certainly learned a lot in the processes of some of these ideas. You know, the audio book was a really good opportunity for me to do a lot of editing and practice, and recording and different software and technology and various things. So yeah, you take what you can, I suppose, from the process, but you know, sometimes you're left with things that you can't repurpose. Like, let's take what I've got here. I've got books, for example. Let's say this flops. What am I going to do with it? I can't repurpose this particularly. So it's a difficult one. We've got some comments coming in, which is nice, because I do genuinely want to explore this today. Michael's tuning in. He's obviously got nothing better to do. I've always found that a good idea works very quickly. So I always move on to the next idea ASAP unless there's data showing there's a reason for it not working. I think that's really interesting. And I would counter that point with, depends how much time, effort and resources you've put into that single idea. Let's say, Michael, you've built websites left, right and center. They always work, don't they? Because you're so good at it. But imagine you've put loads of effort and time and whatever into this website or this project, and it's not working for whatever reason. It's not a technological reason, it just isn't working. You can't necessarily move on to the next idea, I don't think. Maybe you need to recoup things, or maybe you are able to write it off as a loss. I don't know. I suppose it's difficult and depends on each individual circumstance. But I think that is certainly one way we're dealing with projects that don't work, is to move on from them very quickly, put them behind you. We always hear this thing in sports, don't we? The best sports players are the ones that are able to put their mistakes behind them very quickly and recover. And I suppose it's certainly an advert for not putting all of your eggs in one basket. If you're only working on one thing and it doesn't work, then you're going to struggle, aren't you? Interesting. Alistair Beverley's in here in the comments as well. He's put a couple in. It's hard when you put energy into something to see it flop. He parks the idea, steps away, and then revisits at a later date with a fresh pair of eyes, proofreading an article or blog. Sometimes it's hard to see clearly in the moment, and this sort of plays against what Michael was just saying, where let's say the idea doesn't work immediately. Michael's saying, "No, I'm going to move away, go on to the next project. Didn't work, bin it, next." Alistair's saying, "Well, I'm going to park it for a bit, revisit, and come back to it in the future." And Ash James has just chipped in. I don't know where this comes from. This is from Periscope, from Twitter. Just because an idea doesn't work, it doesn't mean it's always a bad idea. It could be timing and social climate, and certainly this is something that I think is happening at the moment. You could have a very good idea and it just not gain traction because the environment and the social ideas behind it just aren't quite on the money for it to take off at the moment. And I think this is about being honest with yourself, isn't it? You've got to reflect on the idea, reflect on the process, and say, okay, let's go back to Michael Schumacher's idea. Let's say Michael makes a website. It doesn't work. It doesn't technologically work. He's not going to bin that off immediately and say, no, it's not the right time for that idea. There's a technical fault in it not working. Can I fix the technical fault? Let's go back through the process. Where did I go wrong? But I suppose if it's not working from a environmental point of view, no one's buying it, no one's visiting it, no one's reading it, there's a different kettle of fish. Do we revisit this in the future? How do we know when the timing might be better? We don't necessarily want to wait until someone else does the idea that then takes off. You might have this idea that it's just a little bit too early. Do you want to keep it going, ticking over for a bit, just in case the time does come? It's a really hard balance to strike, and I think reflecting through the process is really important. And understanding how you got there, I think, is you know, this reasoning process. Why? So I had this idea. I have all these ideas, loads of ideas. Why did I choose that one? Why did I choose that idea? What was that reasoning process? Why did I choose that idea over these others? Did I choose that idea because I liked the idea of it? Was it enjoyable? Or did I choose that idea because I thought it was the best idea for whatever the outcome might be, making money or in clinic making a difference to that person? Did I choose that exercise because it's my favorite exercise at the moment? Or did I choose that exercise because I thought it had the best outcome? Or did I write something because I thought I wanted to write it? Or did I write it because I thought it would make the most money? It's difficult. Difficult balance to strike, and you probably only know that in retrospect. But I think it's a good process to go through, thinking about the ideas that you've chosen to move forward with, or whatever it is in clinical practice. Why I choose to go forwards with that. I think that's a good starting point. And then the technological process. Did it take too long? Could I have learned things along the way that would have sped things up? Could I have done things more efficiently? Could I have delegated some of this component out to someone who is better than I am? Could I have delegated out design or the copy or whatever it is out to somebody else? So I think there's lots of things that you can reflect on before necessarily binning the idea, or even leaving it and coming back to it. Ash James has written again from Twitter. Hard to be impartial. I've pitched the idea as someone else's before to get honest feedback. It's interesting, isn't it? Because if they let's say they went, oh wow, that's an amazing idea, I'm going to go and speak to them more about it. I suppose maybe Ash is talking about making up somebody fictional as the his alter ego Josh Ames has created all these ideas that he gets feedback on first. I will often, with some of the things that I write and the ideas that I have, pitch them to colleagues, etc., and say, you know, what do you think of this? Tear it apart. Where are the problems? Where are the gaps? I think that's a really good process to go through. Joe Turner is here. Hi, Joe. Glad to have you tuning in to speak to me today. She tends to agree with Michael, but I think you need to have strategies to make it not about you, not take it as a personal rejection. I think in my experience of what I do, I am almost the other way around, and I'm like, no, it's other people are the problem, not me. It's not my fault. I'm very dismissive of anything that I could take as personal problem, a negative against me. It's definitely not my fault whenever these things don't work. It's definitely the social climate. It's definitely everybody else not seeing the value in what I've made. That's always the approach that I've taken. I don't really fit your average, but certainly you do have to divorce these ideas. We see a lot of this, don't we, in people whenever an argument springs up in social media. People have these ideas which are too tallied to their or too tied to their personality or their sense of self-worth, and that's problematic. We definitely need to divorce our creations from our sense of self, I think, and it's not that they're rejecting you, it's that the idea isn't that good. And you know, I'd be interested to know how many ideas people have that work versus don't work. Certainly it's interesting. Joe then goes on to say, it's all my fault. Yeah, it probably is all my fault. I probably don't assess other people as well as appropriately should. But certainly, yeah, certainly you can't take these failures. Like, I mean, if it's functioning as it should, and it's a failure of effect once it gets out into the public sphere, then that's certainly something very different. I mean, obviously, if you fail at creating the thing appropriately and it just doesn't work from a technical point of view or a process point of view, then that's something that you can pin on yourself. But certainly it's different. It's something we shouldn't take personally when these things don't work, because you see also how many times do you, on a simple note, how many times do you see something on Twitter and you think it's interesting, it's got no likes, no retweets, you scroll past it. And then other times you see something and you think, it's an inane thing to say on the internet, and it's got 1,000 likes. Very strange environment, especially in social media. Something I think I've learned from Michael Schumacher is this idea of consistency rather than peaks. He very much likes to keep things on a consistent basis rather than this trying to get something trending or viral. Rather have something, and then if you go viral within your consistency, that's a different idea. And I think it's about, why didn't this idea work this time? As we talked about a bit earlier, what about the social environment, or what about the context in which we released this wasn't quite right? We've talked about between us as a team how people don't seem to be buying things very much. Jack was on the show last week talking about how COVID has changed, or maybe changing, and social situations with people going to pubs, going out, how this is all very different, and we're seeing this at places like Wimbledon, where it's not as busy as it was before. What is it about? Is it generally that people aren't buying things? Have they got less money? Are they being a bit more careful with their money? What is it about now that means this specific idea didn't quite work? Or what is it about this theory I'm trying to project that's not quite taking hold? Are people not getting it? Have we not laid the groundwork appropriately and kept at that consistency to begin with, to then build on top of? I don't know. Maybe this is something you need to consider when your ideas don't work. On a simpler level, when we're talking clinically, you give someone an exercise program, it doesn't work, they come back and it's worse or not better, and they don't like it, and they don't like you maybe. But what is it about that exercise program that's not worked? You thought at the time it was the best exercise program, otherwise you wouldn't have prescribed it, surely. So what is it? Is it the individual? Do they need something different? Do they need a groundwork laying before they can engage? And I think this is the same with ideas, bigger concept ideas. I think it's quite easy for us to, or so easy for me to use that clinical base to think, okay, well, maybe I projected too much of myself onto that patient before I prescribed this exercise program. I thought, well, I like a strengthening program, I'm going to give them a strengthening program. And actually what they really, really like is yoga, for example. I don't know. So I think laying some groundwork before these ideas are released is quite a good idea. But also seeing, again, going back to this sort of clinical concept, absorbing that information from the patient and building something that's appropriate for them. So on a larger scale, we're absorbing the trends of what's happening on social media and in the profession, and then producing something that relates to that or builds on that, so that you're not trying to generate all this momentum. It's very hard from a standing start to generate momentum. So how are you building on top of that? But equally, from the flip side of that, we can see from a lot of trends that are happening that it's very difficult to, when something has a lot of momentum, to then keep up with that. So you look at the podcast market at the moment, it's absolutely saturated. Everybody's got a podcast. I'm sat here now streaming. I've minimally prepped for this, really. Certainly from a technological point of view, I've hit go and started talking. Trying to launch a podcast at the moment is really hard. You've got to fight through all of that noise, all of those other podcasts, good, bad, ugly, brilliant. Because there's so much momentum. People are already in these podcasts, already listening to a lot of podcasts. They've already got their favorites. Their favorites come out regularly. They've got a myriad of different ones that they listen to. How are you going to break through that noise? So I suppose the butter zone really is to find something that's on the, missing a screen with my hand, or something that's on the up, that you can bandwagon onto, for want of a better term, and carry that momentum with you, but so you're not starting from a standing start. But also from the flip side, get this hand out the screen, I don't know what I'm doing today with my hands, but rather than it already being up here and then you trying to break through that noise. So I think understanding this whole situation is quite difficult, and then reflecting once those things don't quite work. What is it about that didn't quite work? I think it's really interesting. So to give a little bit of a more specifics, I suppose, you know, I'm going to absolutely plug this, but I wrote this year after we've done a few bits of osteoarthritis, or certainly I've done a few bits of osteoarthritis and had gained a bit of momentum with osteoarthritis, and I thought, let's follow this up. Let's spend a good number of hours writing a good few thousand words on osteoarthritis, and people are going to lap it up. And I was miles off. No one's been interested in it at all. So what was it about that situation? I think part of it is people aren't spending any money, or spending far less money, or being very careful with their money. But also, I think what I did was I tried to capitalize on that momentum that we just talked about that was already up here. That momentum was already really fast. People were saturated with osteoarthritis. And then try and release something into that, and it just gets lost in the noise. So it's difficult to then, because I'm proud of this. I think it's one of the best things I've written, in my opinion. I read it the other day, and I was quite happy with it. So, you know, from the process point of view, I don't think there's something that I did wrong, but I think there is a social environment that meant it didn't do very well, and maybe would I in retrospect, should I have released it either earlier? Would be difficult. I'd have had to write it faster. Release it earlier, and then when the momentum was down a bit, coattail onto that. Or as who was it, Alistair says, should I park this book for a while, just leave it, and then push it in a few months' time when osteoarthritis, and certainly in the circles that I'm in, has settled down a little bit and something else has turned up. People want a different idea for something else. So I don't know really, and certainly, like I say, I don't have any of the answers, and I don't really have any of the answers on this specific book either. We'll find out in due time what I end up doing with it. So yeah, don't know really. So we've got a couple more minutes left of this this stream. So anybody who has got any ideas about, or any reflections on ideas they've done that haven't worked, and whether it was their fault, some other fault, or anything else to add to this, because we've had environmental factors, we've had parking the idea, we've had let's leave the idea, move on to the next project. And of course, that's very easy for me to do, being someone who does basically spend their life working on projects. I can just drop it, move on to the next one. What projects I choose to do, either regarding rheumatology or therapy live or whatever it is that we've got coming up, that'd be interesting choice to make. But yeah, anybody got any further comments on this before we wrap it up for today? Thank you to everybody who has tuned in and made a comment so far. It's been interesting to think about some of these things, and certainly something about the personal rejection that Joe mentioned, something that I've not particularly thought about but like I mentioned, isn't something that particularly affects me anyway. But yes, don't do that. I think we certainly shouldn't be put off trying to be creative just because one thing doesn't work. I think I was quite lucky when I started in this creative endeavors that the first idea or two did work and did do okay, and that gave me momentum personally to then continue trying that. Joe's come in here. Simple idea, but the two biggest successes I've had were things I really loved doing rather than being too beholden to the outcome. And I think that's important to a degree. Depends what the outcome is, isn't it? So if your main outcome is that you enjoyed doing it, then you're certainly going to succeed. If there's some monetary necessity to it, because either you've put a lot of resources into it, or you've taken a lot of time or something like that, then enjoying it's not necessarily a good outcome as a sole outcome. However, the enjoyment of it is certainly something that we should take away. And I certainly enjoy. I'm lucky. Don't take projects on necessarily now that I wouldn't enjoy doing. One of the things that I very much am delighted by is working for Choose Health and Physio Matters, in that I do enjoy all of that. Is as much my hobby as it is my job. And so the projects that I take on, I do enjoy, which is really good. But obviously, there's a lot of people that won't necessarily be doing that, or won't have that luxury. But certainly, I think what I'm assuming, what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that they were successful as well as you enjoyed, as you loved doing them. So it wasn't necessarily that you were aiming to make money out of those projects. You wanted to do them because you enjoyed them, and then they did then go on to make money or whatever other outcomes that were there. So really interesting thought. And I certainly think passion and enjoyment and hard work shows through in a project. I think people can. Joe is agreeing. Yes, excellent view. Glad I didn't misrepresent you, Joe. I think it really is obvious when someone's put a lot of work into something, really enjoyed it, or passionate about it, as opposed to something that comes out when they've had to do it or they've been pushed into doing it, something like that. And I think it really is obvious when that's the case. So it's hard. I can't sit here and say only take on projects that you enjoy. It's insane, isn't it? But I think, should we preferentially take on X project with whatever outcome I do enjoy versus Y project with a different outcome that I don't enjoy so much? Which one are you going to take on? And I suppose that depends on individual circumstances. But certainly the one in the mirror. Certainly I err on the enjoyment projects these days, which I'm lucky to do. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Any further comments, please do send them in. I will be around later in the week. I haven't decided what other topics we're going to talk about this week, but I'm hoping to talk about something about confidence with technology and presenting, something like that. So if anybody's listening to this or watching this and has some particular feelings on lacking confidence in presenting or presenting online or using technology, then be delighted to talk to you. It's not something I struggle with, spending most of my day sitting staring at a computer, but lots of people do. We get lots of feedback that people do struggle with the technology of presenting, especially online, or struggling with talking to the screen and things. So if anybody does want to come on and talk to me about that, then I'd be delighted. Tomorrow, I think, is the First Steps team, so they will be taking over for Chewing It Over tomorrow. So looking forward to that. Hopefully they've got some interesting topics to talk about. And yeah, other than that, thank you for tuning in. If you do want one of these, I'm gonna absolutely shamelessly plug this that hasn't worked. Then you can find that on rheumatology.physio/shop. I like it. I think I've done a reasonably good job at discussing osteoarthritis, with some pulling together a lot of the things that I've learned over the last few months. And yeah, be very grateful if you had a look at that in consideration of that. But otherwise, thank you for joining me. Thank you for tuning in and being interactive. And anybody who watches Chewing It Over regularly, please remember that the sign out music is incredibly loud. You might want to take your earphones off. I've been Jack March. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.